I just had to share this experience I had. It was quite terrifying at the time it happened. When I was maybe 12 or possibly a little bit older, I was waiting for my ride after school one day. All of a sudden, this big white family van pulled up right in front of me and asked me if I was waiting for my ride. My family just so happened to own a van just like this one, so it wasn't suspicious or anything to me at first. Maybe it was a bit dumb, but I answered that yes, I was. He was asking an obvious question, I suppose, since here I was sitting outside the school by myself. I answered nonetheless. Then he asked me what my name was. I hesitated, but he explained that he was looking for someone, so I gave him my name. I told him my name was Thea, and he said, "Oh, it's you! You know, your mom asked me to come pick you up from school." He introduced himself as Sam, my mom's nephew. I had never really met my mom's family, so I was none the wiser. Eager to get home and out of the bitter cold, I didn't even question him very much, even though I was somewhat skeptical. I just jumped right into the car. Thinking back on it now, I realize how dumb that was, and just how lucky I was to get away. I got in, and immediately we started driving in the opposite direction of my house. At first, I thought it was no big deal. There was a route on this way to my place, just a bit farther down the road. Soon, though, we passed by that route as well. Out of nowhere, I realized we were now on the motorway. All traces of tiredness immediately left me, and I was on the verge of tears. I asked him if he could please take me home. If my mom sent him, he should know I'm not really allowed to go out after school. The man kept on ignoring everything I had to say. At this point, I started officially bawling my eyes out. Cars passing us on the motorway or sitting next to us in traffic were beginning to stare at our vehicle. At one point, I was crying so much, the man slammed his hands on the steering wheel and started mumbling about how this would be so much easier for both of us if I would just shut my fucking mouth. I wasn't thinking straight though. I knew that anything would be better than making it to wherever this man was taking me. The very next time the car slowed down in traffic, I unlocked the door and jumped out, even though we hadn't come to a full stop yet. In all honesty, I wasn't thinking at all in that moment, because if I thought about it for even a moment, I know I would have chickened out. For once, I'm glad I didn't. I hit the ground and landed hard on my left leg. The pain was extremely bad. I didn't care though, because in my head anything was better than being stuck in that car. The man didn't even bat an eye. I feel like in the chaos he tried to reach out and grab me, but once I was outside the vehicle, he just sped away through the rest of traffic. A driver beside us almost hit me, but stopped just in time and got out and ran towards me. They called the police, and my parents as well. To this day, I'm not allowed to wait outside anywhere, and even before I'm done with whatever I'm doing, my parents will always be outside waiting. When I was around 10 or so, my parents and I went to visit my grandmother for spring break. My cousin also came to visit as well, and we decided we wanted to go to the YMCA for the day. My grandmother dropped us off and said she would come and pick us up in 4 hours. On that day, the YMCA was empty. There were a couple of adults in the exercise room, but that's about it. We went to the basketball court, and after 2 hours of playing tag and shooting baskets, we were quite bored. I've never been the biggest fan of swimming, but this YMCA had a pretty cool pool area. We changed into our bathing suits and headed in there. The pool was completely empty, all except for the lifeguard. We played a bunch of games and swam some laps, but after an hour, there wasn't much left to do yet again. There was no one except us to hang out with to keep things interesting either. We decided to play a bit of a game, seeing how long we could hold our breath underwater. We stood in the shallow end near the clock on the wall so we could time ourselves. Instead of fully submerging, we'd just stick our heads face down in the water a bit. We did this a couple of times and I ended up winning. On our very last round, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I figured it was my cousin giving up and telling me I'd won. Instead, it was the lifeguard, who told me to knock it off, or she was going to have to ask us to leave the pool. Since we were tired of being in there anyway, we figured we'd just get out. We'd get dressed, go back to the basketball court until our grandmother picked us up, and just wait there. We only had an hour left anyways, and the water was freezing by this point. As we got out, the lifeguard stopped us and asked us if we wanted to go into the sauna to warm up and dry off. The sign said 18 years or older, so of course we were super excited she allowed us to even do that. She walked us to the sauna and unlocked the door. The door was glass, and the interior was made entirely out of wood. Inside above the door, there was a clock, probably to make sure you were not in there for an unsafe amount of time. The lifeguard stand was adjacent to the sauna, but if you looked out the door, you could very clearly see it. She followed us in, went over to the thermometer encased in plastic, and unlocked it so she could crank up the heat. I figured she must have to turn it on each time or something, so I didn't really think much of it. Both my cousin and I were very short girls, so we couldn't actually see the temperature that was printed on the thermometer knob. We knew she was turning up the heat at least. She left and shut the door behind her. I thought I saw her lock the door as well. I thought to myself though, why would she lock the door when we might want to get out? I checked the clock and decided we should leave in about 10 minutes or so. It was already plenty warm in the sauna, but the room only began to get more blazing. It felt nice at first because I was so cold from the pool. After about 15 minutes though, it was starting to get a bit too hot. My cousin agreed we should leave so we could get dressed. I went to turn the knob on the door, only to find that it would not budge at all. I thought maybe it had been jammed, so I shook it as hard as I could. It still wouldn't open. I then let my cousin try. She couldn't get it to open either. We figured the lifeguard would be back in a couple of minutes anyway, so we sat back down and waited. The room was getting hotter and hotter, and I really wanted to leave. We got up and started banging on the door for help, shaking and twisting the knob, trying to get the guard's attention. As the room continued to get hotter, we began to scream at the top of our lungs for her to let us out, but she just stared straight ahead, ignoring us. There's no way she wouldn't have noticed or heard us banging and kicking the door and screaming. By now, we had been in there for 25 minutes. It was so hot in the sauna I could barely even breathe. It felt like my lungs were on fire. My skin and eyes were burning. We sat back down and put our towels over our heads. They were at least still a little bit damp and made it easier to breathe. I was worried about my cousin especially. She was a couple of years younger than me, and she was really struggling. I looked at the clock and saw we had been stuck inside for 35 minutes. I got up and walked to the door again. I saw the guard still just staring straight ahead. Again, I tried to get her attention by screaming we needed out right now. I banged on the door as hard as I could, but still nothing. I was starting to get dizzy. I went to sit back down, but the wooden seats were so hot that they burned my skin. The towel was completely dry, so I put it underneath me to cover my skin. My hair was also extremely dry. I wrapped it across my face to cover my nose and squinted my eyes so they wouldn't burn as badly. I tried my best to still watch if anyone walked past the door. It helped me a bit. My cousin was laying down with the towel over her head, not moving or saying anything anymore. I nudged her to make sure she was still okay. I could tell we really needed to get out of here right now. She was extremely disoriented. It had been 45 minutes now, and I was beginning to get nauseous. There was no way the lifeguard had simply forgotten we were in there. I thought she would come back soon, but there was a little voice in my head telling me that she'd purposefully locked us in there. Finally, a man just happened to be walking past the door to the pool. I was too weak to even get up though. My whole body was on fire. I was too dizzy to stand. Luckily, the man wasn't going to the pool. He wanted to be let into the sauna and came back with the lifeguard. I saw them walking this way and immediately jumped up to grab my cousin. I knew now for sure she had locked us in there because as she neared the door, she pulled out her keys to unlock it and let the man in. I didn't want to take any chances of us being trapped in there any longer. As the man was trying to walk in, I was desperately trying to shove our way out. As we were trying to escape, the lifeguard began to shut the door and try to push me back inside. The man was clearly confused about what was going on. "Hey, what are you doing? I think they want to get out." The lifeguard let out a huge sigh and opened the door fully. I grabbed my cousin and ran as fast as I could to the changing room. We only had about 10 minutes before grandmother was supposed to pick us up. We were both so shaken by what just happened that we didn't say anything to each other as we got dressed or on the car ride home. When we got back to the house, my parents were making us dinner, and I told them the story of what happened. They thought I must have been exaggerating and told me they didn't believe me. I truly believed that woman was going to let us cook alive in there. The only bit of doubt I have is what would have happened if we'd actually died. She obviously would have gotten the blame, so what was her endgame? I'm 21 now, but I still think about this interaction all the time. When I'm in small spaces or I get too warm, I still have panic attacks. No one I tell ever believes this story. I mean, I get it, it's pretty absurd, I know. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to ask for opinions or whatnot, but what do you think this could have been? Some crazy misunderstanding? Or do you think she really wanted us to die? If so, why? I was always an extremely small and sickly child. I looked young for my age because of this. My family and I lived out of town, about 8 miles or so away. Our little community was right next to a highway. The school bus would drop me off about 2 blocks away from home every day. One day, as I was dropped off, I noticed a red truck following slowly behind me. So slowly, I figured they must have been just looking for a house address or something. I ignored it and continued walking home. That was the end of that, I thought at least. Consistently though, every day this truck would appear to follow slowly behind me. After a couple of days of this, I walked into my house. I was always the first one home, and peeked out of the window. I could see inside was an older man in a black lab. He was staring at me, just idling inside his truck by my home. All of a sudden, he met my eyes and pulled away. I decided enough was enough. I told my parents about the truck that had been following me. Of course, my sister was quick to jump in and chime that I was lying. I had a habit of telling stories at the time. Thankfully, though, my mom believed me right away. Instead of allowing me to go by myself, she drove me to the bus stop the next morning. The red truck was there, just across the street at the gas station, pointing directly at the bus. I hopped on the bus. Meanwhile, my mom decided to drive around the truck and get a better look. She described the scene later to me. The man was extremely disheveled and dirty, hunched over in his seat and giving an empty stare at the bus. His license plates were caked over in mud, so she couldn't see the numbers at all. It freaked her out so much she called the police and the school. I went to school and was quickly pulled into the office as soon as I arrived. The man had been spotted at the school, waiting there in his truck. That day, I rode the bus home. This time, the truck was parked alongside the street. I would have had to walk past this man's driver's side door to get home. I debated on what to do. Apparently, this man was getting quite desperate now that he'd been spotted. A police car was nearby, thankfully, and I talked to the policeman. They went to go confront the man. As soon as they approached him, though, he pulled away from the curb and took off down the highway. I never saw him again, and I don't believe he was ever caught either. Because of this experience, I'm extremely guarded and paranoid with my own daughter and her soon-to-be sibling. The world is a terrifying place these days, and children can go missing so easily. I don't like to think about what would have happened if I'd been grabbed. I suppose I wouldn't be here typing this, and my kids wouldn't exist either. I was lucky that day. Many people are not. If you haven't already heard it, this story is a continuation of my last post. A man had been following me around as I was walking home from school, and on one day took the chance to grab my shirt from behind and try to attack me with my own headphones. That's relevant information for this scenario, as it's the same man who's doing this as well. The man who'd been watching me as I came home from school started walking back and forth to and from the sidewalk in front of my house. He'd done this 3 times since I last shared that story. Every time I saw him, I was always home alone. I called my mother to let her know every time he was around, and we contacted the police as well to tell them he kept on coming by our house. They haven't been able to do anything except record it, since he's never actually stepped foot on our property, at least until recently. Starting this week, though, I started noticing tapping and scratching sounds from downstairs, starting as soon as it would become dark. It worried me a great deal, of course, but I was too scared to look outside until very recently. My dogs weren't barking, and they would always do that if someone strange was outside. When I finally got the courage to look out, though, I saw a person hunched over a few feet away from the entrance to our home. I couldn't see any of their facial features because they were wearing a large hood completely pulled over their face. It looked like they were scraping something against the siding of our home. Immediately, I dialed the police and hid somewhere in case they wanted to break in. As soon as the police arrived, though, the person ran off faster than I ever imagined and was not pursued. I spoke with the police when they started to check things out again, but nothing could be done. There was no proof of who the person could possibly be. They'd only seen him running off. They said they would keep an eye on it in the future, but at the very most, all that had happened so far was trespassing. I brought up the fact that I had been attacked not long ago by a strange man. I thought it must have been the same person, but once again I was brushed off. The police said it was possible, but without any actual evidence that they were the same person, nothing could be done. I couldn't accurately recognize the person outside my window, and I hadn't been seriously injured in the attack either. I don't know what kind of evidence is needed to do something about someone stalking a minor home alone, but apparently I had no such thing. This morning, a small brown package was left on the doorstep. In it were pieces of electronic parts I didn't recognize and plastic shards with crumpled newspaper at the bottom. There was also a note that said, "I'm sorry," with a frowny face at the top. My mother notified the police, and again they said they'd just keep an eye out for anything suspicious. I feel like they're not doing anything, and they won't do anything until I'm attacked again or worse. I took some advice from some previous mentions, and now I keep glitter spray with me when I walk home from school, along with a screwdriver and a knife in my room, just in case someone breaks in. I can't really do much else. I'm not confident at all I could win in a fight against this man. I'm worried about what will happen in the future, and I don't even feel safe in my own home. Even when the doors are locked, I check every possible place someone could be waiting for me before settling down. I don't think it's enough, though. Any advice is welcome. More than anything, I just want him to leave me alone. Some friends went to Mexico for a vacation and asked me to house sit and take care of their dogs while they were away. They pay me about $40 a day just to sit around and let the dogs out when they need to go. I'm disabled anyway, so that helps me quite a bit. This is a semi-rural area, and the houses are roughly a quarter mile apart. Police have to come from town 15 miles away, and the response time can be well over an hour. Because of this, I always take my pistol with me. It's always been quiet whenever I've stayed there though, so there was no need to use it. This time was different though. I was in the shower when the dogs suddenly started barking, growling, and going crazy. They're big, large German shepherds. One is actually police trained. The owners loan him out to the county as a drug dog. If you tell them to be quiet, usually they'll obey. This time they didn't though. I went on high alert immediately. I shut off the water and tried to peek out the window. I couldn't see anything. When I walked out of the bathroom though, I saw a shadow flit across the bedroom window. I whispered to the dogs to be quiet for a moment, and then they did. That's when I heard a distinctly male voice. I couldn't make out everything they were saying, but I distinctly heard 2 words. "Come around." I'm sure there must have been more than one person because of this. I ran to the living room and grabbed my pistol when I saw the door handle begin to turn. "I have a gun and I will fucking use it!" I shouted. I heard multiple pairs of feet sprinting away. I was telling Siri to dial 911 and thankfully connected to the county sheriff quite quickly. She said there were 2 cars on another column not far away, but it would take 20 minutes for them to arrive. That was better than the usual hour, of course, but I was still pretty shaken. I explained I was on a farm and would have to go down to the road by myself and unlock a cattle gate to let them in. I notified them to tell the officers that I would be carrying a pistol and to not shoot me by mistake, because I was not going outside without it. The dispatcher reassured me, the one good thing about living in a red state, I suppose. She asked me if I could see the road. I could, so she said to wait by my house until I saw the blue lights coming up. I hung up and called my friends in Mexico. They had cameras, and the footage could be downloaded via app. They said they would go through it while I waited for the cops to arrive. I locked that house down and went down to the gate when the police arrived. They searched the whole area, including the barn, but didn't find anyone. While they were looking, my friends texted me the camera footage. In it, there was a man on the porch. Unfortunately, the cameras were not angled to get a shot of his face. It was very dark. The other angle showed there was more than one creep as well. The police were very nice and said they had passed a man on a bike on the way there, which was strange for this area, especially at night. They went to look for him, but he had totally disappeared. They took a full report, but they never caught the creeps. My husband came and stayed with me for the rest of my friend's trip. One of their neighbors said he found a tent and some gear in the woods a few weeks before, so somebody was definitely living out there. Maybe a homeless person from town or something. I've house sat again since then, and it was completely quiet. They're going away again for Christmas, and I'll be there once more. A lot of people ask me if I would have shot the person had they broken in, and yeah, absolutely, why not? I would be sorry if I had to hurt somebody, but if it's them or me, of course I'd do so.